No mai, haere mai, piki mai, kake mai, kia ora, and welcome to 30 with Guyon Espiner. 30 minutes, one guest, no cuts. What we record is what you get. James Shaw has bowed out of politics after nearly 10 years as co-leader of the Green Party. He took the Greens into cabinet for the first time. He wrestled with the future of the planet as climate change minister. And last year saw the Greens gain 15 MPs, their biggest caucus ever. But James Shaw leaves Parliament with his party reeling from a series of resignations and scandals, and also questions about whether it's become too close to Labour and strayed too far from its mission. So let's start the clock. 30 minutes with James Shaw. Kia ora and welcome to 30, James Shaw. Thanks very much for coming in.
Kia ora, thank you for having me.
Polling from Ipsos in February 2024 asked people whether New Zealand society was broken and whether the country was in decline. 60% of people answered that yes, it was. How would you have answered that question?
I probably would have refused to answer, says former Stats Minister. I think, you know, we're going through a rough patch as a country and as a planet. And so I think that's a sort of a vibe check on how people are feeling right now, rather than a statement of what's factually so. And so I can kind of understand it. You know, my own, I have a bit of a dark view of where things are at right now as well.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, look, it's going to be a bit of a cliche, but I, scan the news and I see what the current government is up to, and I have been sitting, 10 metres across the aisle from them whilst they've been doing it over the course of the last 6 months, and a lot of it, appalls me. But I'm also really conscious that these things are temporary, like inflation is temporary, the kind of state of global affairs kind of waxes and wanes over time. We go through periods of kind of high unemployment and then, low unemployment and so on. And so, if you try to take a long arc of history view, some of those things become in some ways less significant because they are always there in one form or another.
So you don't think that New Zealand is a country in decline?
No, I don't. I think that there are things that we have not been paying attention to for some decades. The obvious one is infrastructure, increasing inequality in terms of that sort of socioeconomic stratification and so on. But I also think that we're a more progressive, much more multicultural, more tolerant, more inclusive society than we were 40 years ago as well.
So you're optimistic about our country's future?
Yeah, I am. Yes, I am. And yeah, I am.
Let's talk about the Green Party, though. As you leave Parliament and as you stand down from your role, how do you rate the health of the Green Party?
Well, don't ask me, ask the public. And the most recent polls have had us on about 14%, which is some of our, kind of historic high watermark. And I know it's been an incredibly rough year. I know, you've talked about kind of resignations and scandals, but actually the death of Efeso Collins was really the greatest blow and has been very, very hard for our caucus and for our staff. But I also think generally the public look at these things and kind of recognise that every political party goes through moments like this.
Yeah, although you've had an extraordinary period with Elizabeth Kerekere resigning as an MP amid bullying allegations, Goruz Garaman, of course, resigning after shoplifting, Darlene Tana suspended after these complaints of migrant exploitation at her husband's company. What does that say about the culture of people that you're selecting and the culture of the Green Party?
I don't think that you can say that there's a pattern there. I mean, if I was to look at, Goruz, for example, to me, look, the first thing I need to say, shoplifting is wrong and it's illegal. and also, that was so obviously to me a case of compulsive, self-destructive behaviour brought on by essentially a mental health crisis. And so I wouldn't say that says something about, our recruitment processes or anything like that. It does say something about the culture of Parliament and of people's treatment of politicians right now.
Did you see that coming?
No, I did not. I have to say, I wasn't wholly surprised when I first heard about it because, we knew that Golri's attracted a level of kind of abuse that was kind of far in excess of what we see in kind of like on average. And on average, that has been increasing. And you would have seen research sometime in the last couple of weeks that came out that said that, the rate of increase on MPs, particularly female MPs, has been increasing significantly over the last 8 years.
Yes, but you said you weren't surprised when the allegations surfaced and now she was convicted of that. So you weren't surprised that she reacted to that situation by stealing those goods?
Oh, I was surprised that that's the way it manifested. But ultimately, I've seen a number of cases in Parliament and with friends outside of Parliament and former colleagues actually who have, gone through mental health crises and have responded in a number of different ways. And with one former colleague from many, many, many years ago, she had been a compulsive shoplifter when she was going through that period. So it's not something that I was sort of unfamiliar with as a kind of neuroses, if you like.
Have you stayed in touch with her?
Off and on.
And how's she doing?
Yeah. Well, look, it's rough. She was a practicing lawyer. She had kind of worked in The Hague on war crimes tribunals. She was a high-profile member of Parliament and a kind of a lead campaigner on a number of issues. And, like I said, it is a sort of a very, it's a completely irrational, self-destructive kind of behaviour for someone who's a member of Parliament and a lawyer and kind of has her sort of background. It's completely irrational.
When you look at those things like shoplifting, bullying, migrant exploitation allegations, and some will look at that and say, what a bunch of hypocrites. You take very strong positions on all of these issues, on justice, on workplace relations and bullying. And yet here are MPs falling foul of exactly those standards.
Well, the reason why Elizabeth resigned is because we were upholding those standards. The reason why Darlene was suspended pending an investigation is because we were concerned that some standards had been breached. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, always to make sure that we are upholding our standards when they to ourselves as much as we would apply them to anybody else. And you'll notice that when other political parties have gone through similar situations with members of their own parties, we have generally stayed out of those and said, well, that is a matter for those parties to deal with, because we're aware that political institutions and political parties aren't perfect.
The Green Party changed its rules in 2022, removing the requirement for a male co-leader. Did you support that change?
Yeah, I did.
Are you supportive of that change?
I did. So the new rule is that of the two co-leaders, at least one has to be female and at least one has to be Māori. And we had a sort of a written rule around in our constitution saying that we uphold te tiriti since the kind of early mid-2000s, and yet I wasn't comfortable that we'd actually structurally embraced that. And so, I did support the constitutional change.
So why doesn't one leader have to be male, though?
Well, because mathematically, if you're saying that at least one has to be female and at least one has to be Māori, then, if you then also say that, one has to be male, then you start to run into trouble with...
But what is the signal it sends to men, especially young men, I suppose, looking at the Green Party?
Well, I don't think that men have ever had a particular problem in politics, and even whilst we've had that rule, I've been the co-leader, right? So I would just say that.
But it wouldn't allow for a Rod Donald and Jeanette Fitzsimons pairing, this current rule, would it?
No, it wouldn't. And back in those days, let me put it this way. Today, our caucus has more Māori MPs than the total number of Māori MPs that we have had in the entire 24 years that we have been in Parliament.
And Parliament doesn't have a problem with Māori representation, does it?
Well, no, that's because we've had to work on it,
It's
Guyon.
28% Māori Parliament. This is 17% of the population. So I suppose your critics, or those who would be critical of the Green Party and these quotas, if you like, would say, look, we don't need this anymore because the representation is there. I mean, what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, first of all, they're not going to vote for the Green Party in the first place, right? But second of all, we have only gotten to those levels of representation by working hard at it. And if you look at the Labour Party and the Green Party, and obviously Te Pāti Māori, that is something that we have worked on. If you look across the aisle at the National Party, they have very few Māori MPs as a proportion of the total number that they've got. And they don't, kind of have processes that advance Māori within their kind of recruitment processes in the way that we do. So, there is a reason why there are Māori represented in Parliament, and that's because for the last 20 or 30 years, little by little, we have chipped away in it and ensured that we have.
But changing this rule, was that partly an effort to get you out of the role?
No.
Because they did oust you, didn't they, in 2022? There was a very brief coup.
It was, yes. No, I don't think those things were connected. And no, the constitutional change was something that had been a long time coming, because I think there were a number of us who, well, like I said, felt that we hadn't really embodied our commitment to Te Tiriti into our constitution, and it had been a very long time since we'd revisited that constitution. How
did you feel about the membership kicking you out of the leadership position? Did you feel betrayed on that?
Well, I mean, I was obviously gutted in the moment that it happened, but I also recognised it was a pretty unusual circumstance in which actually a minority of particularly motivated delegates had kind of used the system, right? So we have this rule where every year you run for the position again, but you have to get 75% of the delegates, which means you only need 25% plus one vote to upend it. That AGM had a week before it had been moved online because of COVID, so it was supposed to be in Otutahi, Christchurch. And so it's sort of one of those things where people just weren't really paying a great deal of attention.
You were always suspected by some, though, of being a bit of an imposter in that position, weren't you? You accept that. You worked for PwC back in the day.
That's been true since I got there in the first place.
Has it?
Well, that suspicion, yeah, sure.
How did that manifest itself? And how did you feel that?
Well, I've had kind of the obvious kind of critics in the media, former MPs, for example, particular kind of factions within the Green Party who, don't like the fact that I seem different from them.
Let's stop there. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that, there would be people who would say that a, middle-class white guy in a suit with a corporate background isn't the kind of, profile that they identify with. And
did they actually say that to you?
Some people have said versions of that to me. But ultimately...
Some Green Party members?
Yeah. But ultimately, I mean, so what? It's politics, right? I mean, it's, politics is... People vote for parties largely on the basis of their identity, right? We all think that we vote on the basis of we analyse the policies and we work out which set of policies, and then we work out who to vote for. We don't think like that. The vast majority of people are sort of have almost like a tribal affinity based on their own sort of sense of personal identity, and then they vote for parties that more closely represent that.
Is that healthy?
No, I don't think so.
But that exists even within the Greens?
It exists in politics.
So they looked at you. They looked at you and thought what?
That I don't look like them, and so there was this kind of suspicion that I was, what is that? There's some great phrases like, a tree Tory or
a tree Tory?
Yeah, tree Tory.
What does that mean?
Well, it means essentially a right-wing environmentalist.
I see.
Yeah.
Are you a tree Tory?
No, I'm a Green. This is the thing, that I've always been frustrated in this country and in politics in general, is that we have this kind of lock around this kind of left-right binary, and I think it's really unhealthy. And I actually think if we're going to solve the great challenges of our time, we have to get above that sort of petty partisanship and work out what are the kind of long-term challenges that we need to fix. And then, frankly, I don't care what your identity is. What I care about is whether or not, we're actually resolving these challenges together, and that we're creating
So if you don't care what your identity is, why do you have to have one leader who's a woman and one leader who's Māori?
That's what I'm talking about, is my own personal sense of that. I do think that as long as politics is the way that it is important for political parties to ensure that we are being inclusive and that we are representing.
Sure, and you've gone over
people.
some of that. But this partisanship and hyper-partisanship and tribalism interests me. You are in a good position to reflect on this. Do you think it's getting worse in New Zealand?
Yeah, I do.
And you're concerned about it?
Yeah, I am. And I mean, look, this is going to sound cliched, right? I think a lot of it is driven by kind of, global social media giants, and the way that they operate is kind of taking something that has always existed in our society, but it is exacerbating it, and it's kind of supercharging it with technology. So I don't think it's a particularly uniquely New Zealand phenomenon. In fact, I think we're probably a little behind, other democracies.
But we're going down the US track.
We are.
Where you can't have friends who are on a different political divide to you, or you don't attempt to change someone's mind. It's just good versus evil, depending on where you see it.
Yeah, I do worry about that. Yeah, I do. And I think, party politics and the kind of increasing sophistication that we have around that, and the technology that we're using to trigger that sense of personal identification with the kind of, political tribal kind of niche, I think is not a healthy phenomenon.
You are someone who reached out across the aisle a bit. I mean, you collaborated to some degree with National to try to get them over the line with the Climate Change Commission and net zero positions, that sort of thing. I think you worked with Todd Muller from the National Party. What about the Green role in saying, I'll only work with the left? I mean, isn't that tribalism? Because you've hitched your wagon so tightly to Labour and pretty much ruled out working with National in the 20 years or so that you've been in Parliament. Is that something that could or should change for the Greens? I mean, should you be open with saying, well, we could work with either of the major parties? Yeah,
look, I think there's two views of that. So the Greens, you're going to accuse me of talking out of both sides of my mouth here. I mean, I think the Greens are pretty comfortably identifiable as a left-wing political party, and that on that kind of binary spectrum, that broadly speaking we sit to the left of the Labour Party, right? I think you sort of make that assumption. So then the people who vote for the Greens are voting on that basis, right? They don't want a right-wing government led by the National Party. They want a left-wing government, and if we
some of the tree Tories might like that.
They might, but my point is that we would. So that this is the political view. Right? So just hear me out. The political view is that if you were to do that, you might be able to, stop National from doing kind of even worse things, and particularly if you were able to kind of block ACT and New Zealand First. But you would probably be punished at the next election existentially, right? So then the question is, how enduring would that change be? That's one view. The other view is that if you kind of look at the current government, by way of example, and you say, well, actually we do care about our planet and we do care about our people, then it actually, your own survival as a political party should be a secondary consideration to, trying to stop those bad things from happening, and if you can, have some good things happen.
And is that the view that you subscribe to?
Yes, it is. It is.
So you're saying, so correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
from my interpretation of that is you are saying that the Greens should in the future be open to working with National.
Well, if the National Party had called us after the last election, I think we would have entertained a conversation with them to find out what might be possible there. And the way that I view that is, and you would have heard Green Party co-leaders for time immemorial say this, Guyon, it is really a matter for the members, right? So I would be would be very comfortable, taking a proposal to the members for them to decide, because ultimately they have to be comfortable with it. That's why, it was a difficult one getting us over the line even in 2017, right? But we got there. It was overwhelmingly in favour. And then when we started facing some of the headwinds and some of the challenges, we could go back to the members and say, well, you voted for us to be in government.
Sure.
This is your decision.
But it's interesting to hear you say that the future of the planet, for example, like getting gains on climate change, should be more important than the status of the Green Party, in that we might lose some votes and some members if we go with National.
I think it's more important than the fate of any political party.
Sure.
I actually don't care about the survival of any of our political parties if the survival of our planet is up for grabs.
Sure, and so that's your message to the Greens ongoing?
That is my message to every political party, is that we actually, in fact, to every individual member of Parliament, that if you want to, resolve some of the really existential threats that face us, then you got to lift your head above the kind of, 3-year electoral cycle. Lift your head above party partisanship and the idea that actually it's all about just winning for the sake of winning, and work together.
So,
you can do that by working in government with people, or you can do it when you're in opposition working with us.
But just to finish this segment, you are saying that the party should be open to working with National in the future.
What I'm saying
if it comes to that.
What I'm saying is, I have always been of the mind that we should take that responsibility, and I would have been very comfortable if the circumstances had been different, going to the members and throwing it over to them. You
could have worked with Christopher Luxon?
Well, yes, I could work with Christopher Luxon, and whilst there are a lot of things about the National Party and a number of people in the National Party I am more worried about, I think you can. I don't think it. You don't have to be a genius to work out that it's not. It's Winston and David Seymour who are really steering the direction of travel in this government.
And you could have changed that as a Green Party by being involved.
Yeah.
Should you have been? Should you have been involved in the 2023 government?
Well, the voters had something to say about that, right? So if you look at the numbers, once the specials were counted, if you added National plus the Greens, it would still have needed either ACT or New Zealand
Yes,
First,
it would have.
and I don't think that would have been a functional government at all.
No.
The current arrangement's hardly functional, so,
Okay. Now, you were Climate Change Minister for 6 years.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your record there. But firstly, we're at 1.2 degree warmer than pre-industrial levels. The aim is to keep it to 1.5, but we're on a trajectory to hit somewhere between 2.1 and 2.9 before the end of the century.
Yeah, if not before.
Are we preserving a planet worth living on?
Well, it's the second half of that sentence I'll take some issue with. In a sense, no, not on our current trajectory. Ultimately, humans find ways of living in pretty extreme circumstances. There are parts of the planet that people have lived for, hundreds, if not thousands of years, that you scratch your head and say, good Lord, what on earth are people doing in this unbelievably inhospitable place? The problem is that we're making more and more of the planet like that. At some speed, so no. So we're not moving with nearly the speed and the scale that we need to be moving.
Are you optimistic that we can get to limit it to 1.5 degrees warming? I mean, you'd need to halve emissions globally by 2030 and stop adding any CO2 to the atmosphere by 2050, right?
I'm not. Last year
You're not optimistic.
I'm not optimistic. Well, last year, if I've got my facts right, we actually exceeded 1.5 last year. Now that could have just been a sort of a blip, because the way these things go is it sort of zigzags upwards. So, it could come down a bit and then go up a bit more and so on in the future. But you can, we are certainly kind of standing on the precipice of 1.5 degrees of warming right now. That is not to say, though, that I think that we should give up, right? To me, what that says is double down. And if you kind of really break it down, or to coin a phrase, to chunk it down, then you go, well, all right. If you're saying 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, back in pre-industrial times, we were about 160 parts per million of concentration in the atmosphere. Now we're at 420. That's a lot. It's 2 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases that we've emitted. What you have to say is, all right, well, the maths here are we have to stop putting it into the atmosphere and adding to the problem, and we have to take the lion's share of that 2 billion tonnes of CO2 out of the atmosphere. And I think that is possible. And if we actually crack on with it, and I think that the chances are increasing over time that we will, and then we have some hope of kind of bringing that kind of back down to
how much of a factor is capitalism and technology going to play in this versus governments regulating?
Well, I don't think that you can disaggregate the two. I think that they go hand in hand, and there are choices that the government can make, right? So, one of the great ironies of recent times, of course, was that we put in place the clean car discount that led to a massive explosion in EV sales. The current government came away and got rid of that. That was a market mechanism, right, that involved a combination of...
Yes, it was, although when you look
factors.
at things like regulatory impact statements on this, it said that there were concerns about equity and fairness because high-income New Zealanders were being able to benefit from this as they were purchasing the EVs. I mean, poor folks, even with a discount, couldn't buy an EV.
No. And our argument is that's why you have things like public transport, and we started to set up a program called a social leasing program for low-income households and so on and so forth. That got canned in the so-called policy bonfire and so on. So I'm not saying that you should only pull one lever. You need a kind of a whole suite of things.
New Zealand have had emissions fall for the last 3 years.
That's right. You're welcome.
So do you see that as the biggest success of your tenure?
Well,
as climate change?
I don't want to overclaim, right? Because things like the weather had something to do with that as well. But I think it was a combination of factors. And when I was in opposition, one of the things I did say was that the only measure of success that a government should use when it comes to climate change is whether emissions are rising or falling. Now, for 3 of the 6 years that I was a minister, they fell.
Do you think that we're going to see that over the next 3 years?
I think that they will fall, but at a slower rate. Yeah. I think that's the most likely scenario. I think a number of different things could happen. Yeah.
Are you glad to leave politics?
Yeah. Yeah. Look,
You're smiling.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's your answer. I never thought of myself as a lifer. I kind of wanted to get in, do the job, and then get out again and get on with the rest of my life. And when I ran for the co-leader back in 2015, I made it my mission to take us into government and then safely out the other side.
So you think it's mission accomplished for James Shaw?
Well, according to the success measures I set for myself, yes.
So what does next look like? What are you going to do?
I have set myself my next mission, Guyon, is to reduce or remove 150 million tonnes of carbon dioxide from global emissions by 2030. And if that number sounds familiar to you, it's because that is also New Zealand's target under the Paris Agreement, which I was responsible for putting in place. And so I kind of have a sense of responsibility towards it, but also I'm mostly taking that particular number on because I want to prove to all of the numpties who are going around in circles wailing about how expensive it's all going to be and what a sunk cost it is and how hard it all is, that actually it's easier than they think and they can do it on a return on investment basis.
So what's your role going to be?
I'm moving into climate finance and investment. So my theory of change is that when it comes to big global challenges, you try and pull the biggest lever available to you. That's why I went into politics in the first place. The second biggest lever, I think, now that politics is closed to me as an option, is in redirecting capital flows towards the green economy.
Any regrets in politics?
Oh, thousands.
What's the biggest one?
Daily. That is a very good question. See, the thing is, I don't really dwell on them, so I don't have a list in my mind. Yes, okay, here we go. It's that that I wasn't able to make as much traction on kind of biodiversity loss and rebuilding our kind of natural heritage and protecting that.
Well, perhaps you can do that after you've solved climate change.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. That was 30 Minutes with James Shaw. This is 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We'll catch you next time.